Welcome to my LinkedIn Live. My name is Ericka Hines, and we're going to wait for a few people to join before I get started, but I'm very excited. I'm going to be talking about, specifically, I want to talk to Black women about how we can fortify ourselves during this time. In terms of sort of some of the types of backlash and challenges that we're facing. So I'm excited to be here with you all. And like I said, I'll wait just a minute more and then I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. I'm a facilitator by trade for the last 20 years. So for anyone who showed up on time, I want to honor that you showed up on time and that you've been waiting. So let's go ahead and get started. I decided that I wanted to talk about this topic around how do we thrive or how can we survive in terms of what's happening in the world, because I myself am experiencing this world that's happening around us, both from like professional standpoint, both from like a political standpoint and a cultural standpoint. And as I found myself trying to kind of figure out like, how can I find some footing, or like what will help me kind of like put all of this in some sort of order in my brain. I thought that if I shared some of the ways that I have found to navigate this would be helpful for other people. So I want to just start by telling you a little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Ericka Hines, and I'm the founder of an initiative called Black Women Thriving. This is an initiative that started back in 2021, where we did original research looking at what are the conditions that Black women need in order to thrive in the workplace. We put out a piece of research in 2022 that had over 1,400 Black women and gender expansive folks who had taken our survey and participated in our focus groups. And we really identified kind of 8 key areas of the workplace where Black women were either surviving or thriving. Little insight, most of them, Black women were surviving and not thriving. But what became very clear was this need and desire from me to really think about how could we move the needle towards Black women beginning to thrive in the workplace. And my motto is that if Black women thrive, everyone else will thrive. So with that sort of underlaying all of this, I do want to talk about, put that in the context of this session. And I think that this is a session, like I said, that's really important. My hope is that by the time I finish, we'll have talked about, I want to talk about sort of three examples of kind of the backlash and pushing back that we're experiencing as Black women. I want to give you a framework that has been helpful to me and explain it and kind of use it in the context of what's happening in the world. And then I want to give you some tips to help you find some place of peace and resiliency. And I want to put a little asterisk by resiliency. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to make sure that I'm giving you some tips in terms of how to like move forward, because I've been likening this particular time period as a hurricane, where we know that a hurricane is coming. if you're watching this, you may understand why I'm calling it a hurricane. And all we can do is prepare for the hurricane. So, but that doesn't take away kind of maybe some of the angst and anxiety about it. So as I'm doing that, I would love to hear any thoughts or questions that you have in the chat. So the first piece around kind of like understanding the backlash is, I think we need to understand that we have been in this sort of, as Black women, and again, this is my experience, but it's not actually, I think it's the experience that I'm also witnessing online. I think that we've been in a push and pull for the last several years. I think since the pandemic, we've sort of been in this push or pull around whether we are like surviving the workplace and having to navigate the workplace. Has the workplace and the dynamics in the workplace gotten better or worse for us? And I think that in many ways, in my opinion, it has gotten worse. And I think the three ways that come to mind to me in which it has gotten worse, some of these have been taking place for the last few years. And the last one I'm going to talk about has been, taken place in the last couple of weeks. So the first one I want to talk about is this pushback on DEI efforts. And what I want to say about that is, like, there has been a very clear pushback on DEI efforts at work. That look, the examples or the ways that shows up have been in the fact that there have been layoffs in terms of DEI leaders, folks who actually a few years ago had the job of making your workplace more inclusive and more equitable, no longer are in those positions. They've eliminated those positions. They've eliminated those departments. And a lot of times that has been because there is, it could be said that it was cost savings. I'm going to venture to say that it has been because there has been a decreasing appetite for it at work. And I would say that decreasing appetite has been because of, in my opinion, the fact that people didn't understand that this was a long-term play. So what they saw was, we didn't actually achieve what we needed to achieve in 24 months. Therefore, it's not useful for us to do. How this pertains to Black women is that I will not say that necessarily all of the DEI efforts were, beneficial to Black women. But what I will say is that we were beginning to address issues that Black women were facing, and we could have not only discussions about those, microaggressions. We could talk about intersectionality of being Black and a woman, or Black and gender expansive, sexual orientation. Like, those were becoming conversations and policies and practices that we could talk about. The fact that we have had this sort of backlash and this pushing back around diversity, equity, and inclusion means, number one, those conversations aren't as welcome as before. Those policies and practices that organizations and companies were beginning to put into place, some of them have been outright they're no longer happening, right? Not only have we had leadership no longer there, but we've had, we are no longer going to have this policy that benefits Black women anymore. And I think that as a Black woman, what that has signaled to me is that this is a place, if I'm in an organization, part of what that signals to me is is this a place where I actually should feel included? Or is it a place where I should show up and acclimate as I've been told to do? But is this a place where I feel safe? Is this a place where, if we were, in the workplace, can I feel productive if I don't feel safe? if I don't feel included, right? So these questions that were beginning to get answered are no longer being answered anymore. The second thing that I have noticed that is impacting folks has been the return to work mandates. Again, there are a lot of reasons that the return to work mandates have shown up. I'm not an expert in those, but what I can say is that the impact of the return to work mandates on Black women have had the effect of bringing into question how are Black women faring at work, because it very quickly sort of came into my consciousness and looking at the news that Black women and men and non-binary folks and other folks of color were saying, like, listen, I don't actually want to return to the office, right? And they may have had their many reasons, but one of the reasons was because the return to work meant that there was a higher exposure to things like microaggressions, right? So, I have some statistics here that I found out to prepare for this, so I'm going to read them. A study in terms of the return to office mandates, a study by the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School found that workplace well-being peaked in 2020 with the adoption of supportive and flexible workplace policies. However, since then, that's 4 years ago, well-being has steadily decreased, with Black women experiencing the most significant decline in well-being at work in 2023. Return to work mandates, Black women's well-being. I'm not going to say that there is a causation. I'm going to say that I'm going to lay these out in front of you and you can make up your mind. The second one I want to talk about in terms of the implications of returning to work has been the increase in bias. So, and one particular bias that I want to talk about is the proximity bias. And that is the belief in terms of managers, which is like, if I see you, I know you're doing work. That impacts whether or not I think you're productive. That impacts whether or not I think that you should receive, good performance review. That proximity bias of like, we're returning to work because when we have flexible work, I can't see you. You are not close to me. And also the relational piece of that, right? I can't go and talk to you in person. Like, that has the impact of it can have a negative impact in terms of your performance bias, in terms of your performance, which is very unfortunate. But I would be lying if I were to say that it wasn't necessarily true and that it couldn't possibly happen. So as we're thinking about these return to work mandates, I mean, those two in terms of Black women and getting promotions already and how, like, all of the biases and challenges that there are there. I just think about the fact that the implications of the return to work mandates, of course, I work from home, makes me call those into question and how those are challenging for Black women. And the third one that I want to talk about is the political climate. And this is one that I will say, like, caveat, not all Black women are monolithic, nor are our politics monolithic, but I will say that in the social circles, social media that I followed, and if you have been online at all in your free time, or now on LinkedIn, it was palpable. You could feel it, the reaction of Black women to the presidential race. And I want to give insight into that, like, why it was felt so deeply. And I saw this and felt this all along the campaign. in terms of Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, which is Vice President Harris' campaign was akin to a job interview. And it was akin to being in a workplace. And I can tell you from even where I sit, the amount of times I thought about the fact of, when, the number of questions that they're asking this candidate, Vice President Harris versus the other candidate. That makes me think of being in a meeting and being questioned about the work that I'm doing, and then noticing that my colleagues may not be receiving that same amount of questioning, and in my opinion, scrutiny. Okay? I think it also felt like, in addition to, like hope and joy and things like that, that loss also felt like that loss of losing a job that you really, 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 really wanted. And knowing that it was outside of your control, because folks, and if I think about a job, it was like, here's the interview panel, and they chose someone else that, if we're looking at the paper, what are the qualifications? Like, I felt very qualified for that job. So the sort of like internal aspect of that, of like relating it to our professional realms and seeing how that played out, I think I know impacted the peace and well-being of Black women. And I want to say that isn't just in their personal lives, it's in their professional lives as well. I am not speaking for all Black women, but I am raising this as something that is worthy of considering in terms of how I, as a Black woman, feel like I want to show up in the workplace now. And I want to give voice to that because I think that that's important and worthwhile. So, having sort of said, like, here's these three types of cultural backlash, and I'm seeing I don't think that there are any questions. I'm going to continue on. I want to just put that into context for you of a framework that really has helped me to kind of maybe understand that when things like these three things happen, there's a way that gives it like meaning. And that's like really important to me. And so I'm going to talk to you about something called the VUCA framework, VUCA, VUCA framework. And it's a framework that came out of the military, which, if you know me professionally, is like not an area that I know a lot about. But when I learned about this about 10 years ago in a leadership class, it really made sense to me. And so VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time period. And so I want to kind of give you what that means, and I want you to think about the three examples that I've given you in terms of backlash and pushback, and I want you to think about, how does this framework fit into and help me make sense of what's happening? So volatility. Volatility generally refers to a rapid and unpredictable change, such as the rollback of the DEI programs. You could say that was actually like a volatile time period. And I would say that it's volatile because it happened so quickly, right? The period from 2020 to 2024 is 4 years. I know a lot of people are like, that's a long time, but to go from the rapid rise to 2020 to the deep decline in 3 years, like in 36 months, 3 years, like that's volatile. And I think that in terms of thinking about having a sense of safety and seeing progress, and then seeing that progress is sort of gone, like that can make you feel unsteady at work. It can make you feel like, as I've just said, like unsteady, what's going on, a lack of trust, make you feel kind of psychologically unsafe. Uncertainty is about unknown outcomes, right? Such as the amount of organizational changes. I mean, we can also talk about the amount of layoffs that have happened, although, and also like unemployment and employment. But anyways, my point being, uncertain changes. And so I think that we find ourselves in a period of uncertainty now. Complexity refers to interconnected challenges. That is the workplace. When we're talking about microaggressions, when we're talking about like having teams that are inclusive, like that's complexity. And I think that we have, I think as I was just talking earlier, like one of the reasons, in my opinion, that we have seen like people saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion didn't do as well as it could, is because I think we actually underappreciated the complexity of the workplace dynamics that were happening. And the last one is ambiguity, which is like, what does the future hold? Some would say like, we don't know, in like just overall, we don't know what the future holds. But I think that because we are seeing such swift changes, I think because, again, for the reasons that I stated earlier, I think there's more ambiguity for folks in terms of like, really, what does the future hold? Politically, culturally, professionally for me, and how am I supposed to actually navigate my day-to-day at the workplace in terms of everything shifting, right? So I want to take the little bit, the time that I have left to give you some tips. And the tips that I have, I hope, will be beneficial to you. They've been beneficial to me. And I want to say that like surviving during this time also means that you can start to think about thriving. And I know that may seem very strange, but I want to just say that the idea of thinking about thriving is also an idea of thinking about hope. And I think in light of everything that I've talked about, and I spent a lot of time sort of saying like, this has happened and this has happened and this has happened. And so we can feel like hopeless and we can feel defeated. But if we start to think about, could I move from survival mode to thriving mode? That's imaginative and that's hopeful. And so I want to invite you to do that. So let me give you my 5 tips. And if you were to, this is my time to plug that you should sign up for the mailing list. I've said that 3 times. Because I'm going to give you these 5, and then I'm now going on record of saying I'm going to come up with 5 more tips for you. So if you sign up for our mailing list, you will get all 10 of these tips from me. So the first way to sort of continue to stay grounded is to build out your support system. And I mean that both professionally and personally. I want you to find those colleagues that you have. Black women, I want you to, find fellow Black women. There's a term called sister circles. I want you to figure out who your sister circle is, either in your organization or professionally around you. And I want you all to, 1, get together and commit to holding space for each other in the next year as a starter. Okay? So I want you to build and cultivate that support system. I don't want you to think that you are out here alone. Okay? The second thing I want to talk to you about is I want you to protect your mental health. And I'm going to say that again. I want you to protect your mental health. Whatever that means to you. If that means therapy, if that means worship, whatever that means to you, I think being intentional in this time period of like really thinking, how am I going to protect my peace is really, really, really key. Okay? So that's my second tip. My third tip is to think of your career in an agile space. So, do we want to stay where we are? Do we want to move on? Do we want to develop skills? I guess people talk about like, what era am I in? What era are you in the next 12 months? But I want it to be an area that's like not staying in one place. Where are you going? If you're staying, are you trying to move up? Are you trying to learn more? Are you trying to move out? Have some sense of like agility about thinking about your career. The fourth one is to, and I'm going to actually say this, is to advocate for yourself, but I'm going to say to advocate for yourself to yourself. And what I mean by that is I want you to, I think, again, in my personal experience of thinking about this, is there can be this sort of fear that that I can have as a person and as a Black woman, in terms of like, all of this is swirling around me. And sometimes I have to sort of say, like, one of the examples that I will give, that I have said to my colleagues, and now I'm going to say it publicly, is that I have said, one thing I know about me is that I do good work and that I have a good reputation. And so as I have like gone through professional struggles in the last 3 years, I know that to be true. And that can be ego, but I have evidence to back it up. So advocate to yourself, advocate for yourself to yourself. And the fifth one is one that I've already mentioned, and it's the final one, which is, I want you to think about the future. I want us to understand that things are going to continue to happen, that we are going to continue to acknowledge, see pushback. But I also want us to think about the future that we want to have and that we want to live in. And I'm not talking about that future being 50 years from now. I'm talking about that future being a year from now, 2 years from now. And the reason that I bring this up is actually something that is tied to liberation. And I'll even say thriving. Thriving, liberation, even equity. Those are like terms that can be really mushy. But if I ask you to think about how would you like to thrive in 12 months or in 18 months, you get to start imagining that vision for the future, and you start to, really think through, what does that look like? And if you can imagine it, then we can begin to move towards it. So in the chaos of possibly what could happen, I think it's important to develop that vision, I would say now or early in Q1, and to, as much as possible, or when you need to, look at that vision, think about that vision and how you are moving towards it. So, in summary, I want to say that as a Black woman, I feel like we have always had to have a strategy for how to survive and navigate. And I feel very committed to thinking about what are our strategies to thrive. And I'm here to offer you frameworks and tools and feedback and knowledge, and sometimes go deeper than you would like me to, but I think it's important, so that we can do just that. For those of you who've stayed this long, feel free to type some takeaways in the LinkedIn box, because I would love to interact with you. For those of you who want more, for those of you, this is your first time being involved with Black Women Thriving, sign up for the mailing list. We're about to do some very exciting things in 2025. Thank you all so much for your time. I really hope that this was helpful for you. And with that, have a good Friday. Have a good holiday next week for those of us